Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel where today we are going to do my March mid-month wrap-up. We are going to talk about all the books that I read in the first 2 weeks of March. March has also been a weird reading month, much like February, but a different kind of weird in that I'm just not actually reading as much. So I'm just reading fewer pages per day. It's very steady pace, but just fewer pages than normal. And actually, I'm really okay with this. I've been prioritizing some other things that I've wanted to do, and it's just been kind of a nice leisurely pace, which is completely fine. Except that means that I'm definitely not going to finish everything on my March TBR, which is fine. I just got to figure out which books I do want to prioritize. But because of all that, I only have 4 books to talk to you about. So let's just go ahead and jump right in. The first 2 books are The Crown of Embers and The Bitter Kingdom by Ray Carson, books 2 and 3 in the Girl of Fire and Thorns trilogy. So that is a young adult fantasy trilogy, and it follows our main character of Elisa, who, when she was very young, on her naming day, she was chosen by God to bear the Godstone, and it just basically marks her that she's going to perform some act of service that will be beneficial to her people, something like that. And so fast forward to present day, Elisa is 16 years old, and she has been kind of sheltered by her family, trying to help her prepare for this act of service, which nobody knows what it's going to be. Um, and everybody around her kind of wants to harness that great prophecy energy to maybe help themselves, from the king that marries her in secret, to the enemies who are trying to track her down, to the rebels in the kingdom who actually kidnap her. So now Elisa's been kidnapped, and she's just got to try to survive and figure out how she's going to perform this act of service for her people. And the story goes from there. Now, that is all in the first book, but this is very much a trilogy, so it's like overarching plot. I can't really talk too much about these 2 books without giving away spoilers for that first book. I will mention here that I have already done a full-length review for this trilogy, and I will leave the link down below. But overall, I loved this trilogy. It was a reread, and I wasn't sure going in if I was still going to love it, but I'm happy to report that yes, I did. Um, the first book was definitely a great start, but it can also very easily be read as a standalone. When you get to the end of the standalone, or the end of the first book, it wraps up in a really nice way. There's still some questions dangling out there, some pretty big ones even, but it still felt like a really nice conclusion, and you can definitely walk away from the series at that point. You can't do that with either of these 2 books, partially because the third book obviously is the end of the series anyway, but the second book does not stand on its own. It is very much a middle book where it's like taking some of those questions that were still dangling from that first book and kind of like running with them, right? And continuing on. But we never get to a satisfying conclusion with them until book 3. So there were definitely things that needed to happen before we could get to book 3, and that's all the stuff that happened in the second book. But all that plot kind of felt very thin, and there was a romantic subplot which was nice, but it also felt kind of thin. So overall, I don't think that the strength of the second book is in the plot. It's just kind of in moving everything forward and setting it up to be setting it up for a really good third book. And I think it did that pretty well. And I did still enjoy it. So I ended up giving it 4.25 stars. And then we get to the ending. And the ending was really good. Like, there was still stuff we needed to do in this one too, but it was really fast paced. We were just racing to the ending. It was just generally really good. And overall, with this series, I really loved watching Elisa not grow up so much, but grow into herself and become just much more comfortable with herself and her power. And it was just really beautiful to see. Elisa at the end is not the Elisa that we have at the beginning. And it's just really great to watch that. And just generally, I really liked the overarching plot of this series. And I gave the third book 4.5 stars, and the series overall 4.5 stars. Would definitely recommend. After that, I tried to read The Self-Care Solution by Jennifer Ashton. And this is a nonfiction self-help book where Jennifer Ashton basically decided to do one healthy challenge every month that does not continue on from that month. Like, so she's not stacking these challenges on each other where you are now trying to do 12 things in December. It's literally like do it for 1 month and then stop. And I really liked this approach because like it really gives you a good sense of what each healthy activity, habit, whatever is actually doing for you. Because like when we start a bunch of different activities, it's like if you decide to exercise and meditate and eat better, and then like because of all that you're sleeping better, you don't actually know which habit is making you sleep better or if it's all three together, right? And so I really liked the like isolate each change and see what happens. So I really appreciated that, and that's why I picked this book up. However, I did DNF halfway through because there is a strong emphasis on the author's body. She doesn't really fat shame. She doesn't fat shame other people at all. Like not at all. There's none of that in this. But she is very focused on her overall appearance, like what the various parts of her body look like and how much she weighs, and hoping that certain challenges will help her lose weight. And I just don't appreciate that at all. It's just not my cup of tea. I just couldn't do it anymore. We got to July where it was like more steps, and she was talking about how she was hoping it would help her lose weight from her vacation. And I couldn't do it anymore. So I DNF'd it. Now, separate from this, but still part of this, one of those negative things that I noticed is that she does definitely try to be inclusive of different types of people and understanding that not all challenges are going to be beneficial to everybody. Not everybody can really like engage in all these challenges. These are just the ones that she chose. But like her tips and tricks and sometimes just how she approaches things isn't as inclusive as I think she was trying to be. And it's like, for example, like tell everybody you're doing this challenge and they'll keep you honest. And I'm like, you've clearly never met that person where that doesn't actually help and just actually adds to the guilt and shame. Like, you know what I mean? Like, no, you can like take and leave all the tips and tricks you want. But it was just kind of like that overall feeling where she was definitely trying to be inclusive, but it felt kind of like maybe she doesn't have an extremely wide circle, and so doesn't quite know how to do it effectively. So like I wasn't getting anything from it. I didn't like all of the focus on her own body. I didn't love the fact that it was like not as like a lot of this stuff didn't I just like again the tips and tricks like most of them I looked at and I'm like I would never do this. So I really didn't pull anything from it, so I did go ahead and DNF it. And then the last book that I have finished is You'll Never Believe What Happened to Lacey by Amber Ruffin and Lacey Lamar. And these are crazy stories about racism. So Amber Ruffin and Lacey Lamar are sisters. You might know Amber Ruffin because she is a writer on the Late Night with Seth Meyers, and she appears on various clips on that show. She's got her own show as well on Peacock, and so she is very funny. I really do appreciate her humor. Lacey is her sister. So the thing is, Amber lives in New York, and as she says she is nobody's first Black friend. However, Lacey lives in Omaha, Nebraska, which does have a population of Black folk. However, like from what I can tell from reading, and I don't know because I don't live in Nebraska, it seems to be a fairly still a smaller population of Black folk, and it seems like it might be a little segregated. I don't know. Maybe that's incorrect, but that's just kind of the general feeling I got from this book. But what it means is that there are not a ton of Black people around, and Lacey can be people's first Black friend or Black coworker, and they say and do some really, really racist things. And so they collected a lot of these stories into this book. So this book, for formatting, is mostly written by Amber. And there's like little interjections from Lacey, who, and like they differentiate it with like a different font. And on the e-reader, they also made the font bigger. But like it's primarily Amber telling these stories. And like if you've never seen Amber do any of her stuff on like Late Night with Seth Meyers, she's got a bit of a chaotic energy to it, and she definitely brought that to this book. So there are a lot of racist stories. They are definitely horrifying, even as like some of them are like hilarious, right? Like it's so, and it's just a weird mix of feelings you get from reading this book. But like I said, Amber has a lot of chaotic energy, and she's the one that's primarily telling these stories, and it just like that chaotic nature made it a little bit difficult for me to read this book. Now, part of this is because it's stories about racism. They don't necessarily have a good ending, right? Like that feels like an ending. The story just ends. And so what I would find is that we would have this story, we would have the ending, but it didn't really feel like the ending as you would from like a story. And then Amber would go on a tangent. And sometimes that tangent was the transition into another story. Sometimes that tangent was another story in and of itself, leading into another story. Sometimes that tangent was another story, and then like it wasn't really a lead-in, but now like it's another story, like we're going into another story that's not related at all. Like, and then sometimes there would be this tangent with a story, and then we would actually come back to the first story, and it was like, oh, I guess we weren't done with the first story. And it was a little chaotic for me. This was a really hard thing for me to be okay with, because like I'm just a little bit too linear for some of that stuff, especially when it's not clear that like what we're doing here. Like we're telling stories about racism, but like I don't know when the story is ended, and we're kind of going all over the place. Now, I think a lot of people would not necessarily have problems with this. You may be not as uncomfortable with the not like strict ending. These racist stories not having a strict ending. I definitely really wish it did, although like it's nonfiction. Like I'm not gonna. I understand that that's just not how this works. But it did make it much more difficult for me. The other thing is that I think for a lot of people, especially those who are maybe not as tuned with like some of the horrifying racist things that happen on the daily, and especially people who are maybe a little bit more optimistic about how people wouldn't be so awful. I think if you're in one of those camps, you would definitely get something out of this book that is like, it's going to help you calibrate just how awful people are and how racist people are, right? Now, like I didn't need that calibration because I like have heard some really horrific things. But and so I just like, yeah, I mean, people are horrible. Like, you know what I mean? I'm a little bit pessimistic about people anyway. Individuals anyway. And so like it was like horrifying and sometimes still funny. Again, that weird mix of emotions, but I wasn't surprised by anything, even the really horrifying stories at the end. So like I'm not sure that I was quite the audience, But I still do think that this overall is a good read. I would still recommend it. It just didn't quite do it for me. And I ended up rating this 3.75 stars. And so now those are all the things that I read. I figured that I would kind of now talk about the things really quickly that I am currently in the middle of. So first up is Caliban's War by James S.A. Corey. That is the second book in the Expanse series. I'm on page 482 out of almost 600. So clipping along. I should finish this hopefully tomorrow. Very much enjoying it. It was a little slow in the beginning, but now we're pulling all the different pieces of the story together. So I'm thinking it's going to be a downhill slide to the end, which I'm really excited about. And then the other thing that I'm in the middle of is The Simpsons and Their Mathematical Secrets by Simon Singh. And this is a nonfiction book that is, like the title says, the TV show The Simpsons actually shows a lot of math in it, and Simon Singh takes a dive into some of those mathematical concepts. This is a little bit slow going. I'm only on page 78 because this isn't exactly what I was expecting. There's a lot less math in it. Like, there's definitely math. There's an explanation of the math, but it's not quite as in-depth as I was expecting. There's a lot more history of math in there. Like, for example, we get into sabermetrics, and Simon Singh explains how sabermetrics kind of came about, how it was started, and how it became popular. And I wasn't necessarily expecting that. So a lot of the math history stuff I actually already know. So it's not quite as, like, this book is still enjoyable. It's just not as amazing as I was hoping it was going to be. So it's just a little bit, I'm going through this a little bit slow. But that is it, you guys. Those are all the books that I read, as well as the 2 books that I am in the middle of. Let me know down below if, I want to know, have you guys read the Girl of Fire and Thorns trilogy? Have you reread it recently? Did you like it? Do you think it holds up? Because I do. Or, any of the other books that you want to talk to me about, absolutely leave me comments down below. But that is all I have. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And until next time, have happy reading, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.